Great. So I'd like to welcome our next speaker. Chelsey Buffington is with the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife Aquatic Invasive Species Unit. Chelsey's here to talk about European green crab, which is a significant threat to the Salish Sea. I managed to get that out.
Yeah, I won't be saying Salish Sea myself. So yeah, as he said, my name is Chelsey Buffington, and I work with the Aquatic Invasive Species Unit for the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. My boss's boss, Alan, is here today, so if I get a little hung up on anything, he's here to help me. So yeah, Washington's got crabs. European green crabs. There's another photo of one for you. So a lot of people always ask where do they come from, and I'm like, Europe. They're called European green crabs. But yeah, they're native to the Northeast Atlantic Ocean and Baltic Sea. They made their way to the United States back in the 19th century. In 1817 is when they discovered them around the New Jersey, New York area, Cape Cod. And then they made their way to several different places around the world. So they're one of the world's top 10 worst invaders. And like I said, they're here, so that's fun for us. In 1989, they found them in California. And then in 97 in Oregon, 98 in Washington, also in BC in 98 and 99. And then all of a sudden, we didn't see any happening in the Puget Sound. And then in 2016, there was a couple sightings in San Juan Island and Padilla Bay. And then in 2017, we found the populations in Makah and Dungeness Spit. And then all of a sudden, we realized that there was a population happening in Sook Basin on Vancouver Island as well, and that's 2012, 2013. So I'll get to that in a second. How did they get here? So there's, you never really know how aquatic invasive species get to a new place. There's several different pathways, as other people have already stated today. We likely suggest ballast water, especially when it comes from Europe to the east coast of the United States. And then the east coast to California, ballast water seems like a pretty legit way that they got here as well. But there's also things like transfer of light shellfish, bait, aquaculture. They found that in California, genetically, the populations there are very genetically similar to the Atlantic ones that we have on the East Coast. And then we see a movement northward along our coastline, and we're like, well, is that ballast water? Probably not. A lot of our speculations now are with ocean currents, with El Nino events, because our sightings in 98 and 99 coincide with strong El Nino events. And then we had another strong El Nino event in like 15, 16, and that's when we started seeing new little scattered sightings as well. So there's a photo of El Nino stuff. So what is their preferred habitat? Got that one from Neil Harrington with the Jamestown Squalum Tribe. We worked a lot last year together, so he's my buddy now. But yeah, so their habitat, they like protected rocky shores, tidal marshes. I spent a lot of my field season out in tidal channels and places like that. They like to be in vegetated areas and like sheltered structures. However, that's not always the case. If you've ever been out to Padilla Bay, it's just a huge mud flat. And you're like, where are these crabs being found at? But they're out there. And then if you've been to Makah, which I talked to some people, they did some training out in Nia Bay recently. And that's like it's more like this photo on the left. And there's like pickleweed, all sorts of channels and everything. There's a lot of stuff going on. And then the other thing that they're really hardy creatures. They like salinities from 4 to 54 parts per thousand, which I believe is a larger threshold than we see with native species, as well as the temperatures. So they like to freeze and they like to party in the hot weather too. So they are here. And so just keep in mind, they can be in a lot of different places that you wouldn't expect to see them. So what makes them dangerous? They're really small, they're voracious, they're aggressive, they have a lot of attitude, and they eat a lot. They're pigs. So what we have here is that top photo is a green crab eating a clam. So that's what their prey species typically are, is like clams, oysters, mussels. They've been blamed for the soft-shell, New England soft-shell clam industry collapse in the 1950s. A little bit of information about that. In 1939, that fishery was bringing in 14.5 million pounds of harvest. And then by 1959, they only had 2.3 million pounds. And they believe that coincided with green crab coming into that area. They're also known to be, they like to outcompete a lot of our native species, and there's been studies with UW for Dungeness, and They're just faster. They exploit resources a lot faster than other species too, like birds and fish. So yeah, they reduce the abundance of prey species and native species. And then they're vectors for parasites and diseases. I don't know if there's very many studies that have been done in the Pacific Northwest specifically for this reason, but that's known that they are hosts for different parasites and such in different parts of the world. They reduce diversity. So if they clear a bunch of mussels off of a substrate, now it's bare, so then it's just algae can build up on there because they just eat it faster and faster and faster, so they don't have a way to reproduce. And then they also are burrowing creatures, so they like to dig for food and for their burrows, and so they destabilize a lot of habitat and ruin it for all the native species. They are considered a level 1 prohibited species in Washington, which means you can't have it. A lot of people are always like, oh, can I just like kill it, whatever? And I'm like, please don't like move it. Like if enforcement sees you, it's their discretion whether you're gonna get in trouble or not. But what this means for the state is that we have high priority to do early detection, monitoring, and rapid response to these guys. So I made this little map. All those little red dots are where sightings have occurred for green crab. Like these are the first sightings dates that I have here. So like I said, Willapa is that red arrow spot, and then Gray's Harbor in 98 and 99. And then we didn't really see anything else until 2016, which was, I don't know if I have this little part up here, and then we got some down here, and then back up here. So in 2019, we have a new discovery. In January, Taylor Shellfish told us about a couple green crabs that they caught in Samish Bay. These maps here, I got a little carried away because I was playing with maps and GIS, and that tends to happen when you're doing that. The first map there is, that's Willapa and Gray's Harbor, and that is the kind of gives a relative abundance, like what numbers we were seeing and reported from 98 to 2002. So they did over 1,000 green crab captures. And that's when Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife actually had a monitoring program going on for the coastal region. That grouped part for 2003 to 2015. For a little while, I was like, why did I do that? That's when only green crab was still being recorded for Willapa and Gray's Harbor. And then that little bundle there for 2016, 2019, that is when they were being discovered elsewhere. But I just wanted to stress that this is, the middle map is like 12 years, and we only had 211 reports. And that's when no monitoring efforts were going on. And then that 3 years, we had 113 green crab. And not really sure why all of a sudden we started getting more reports in the last few years from growers, but it seems to be happening. But also Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, they employ one person to go out to Tokeland, so that spit right there, to go out and do trapping once a year. So that's where some of those numbers come from as well. This map here is just the total number of green crab. If anyone has ever made a map, you know that immediately it's inaccurate. So I made this map, and then the next day I got an email about how Makah had still been trapping since October. So their numbers are up another 50 plus at this point. And then also when you look at maps for the growers down in Willapa and Gray's Harbor, there's a lot that just kill them, and we have no idea what's going on. So these points onto the left here, we're starting to do a little bit more fecundity because we're kind of curious about Pacific Northwest and how gravid females in our area might differ from other places in terms of fecundity. So I did some research with like all our old reported data, and since 98, there has been only 40 gravid females that we have reported. 10 of those were in 2002, but there's been 6 this year alone. And I find that to be pretty terrifying in my own world, but it's still Willapa and Gray's Harbor, and now Samish Bay one of those was a gravid female. If you look at those photos, that top one, these top 2 were from Brady's oyster. I think they were Brady's oysters from Gray's Harbor, as well as this one down here. One of them might be from Willapa Bay. Either way, these guys are about, I think they were 40 millimeters or so they're pretty small. But this one here is 75 millimeters. That's a huge female, and her egg clutch was like gigantic. So a lot of people ask, like, what is Washington doing about green crab? Well, as I said before, in 98, when they got detected, we had funding come from the governor to start a coastal program. the other part of that was to develop some sort of inland Puget Sound area coast program, monitoring program as well. I'm not sure if that actually happened during then, but it has happened now. We also do regulations on shellfish from when there is an infested body of water. I believe that like regulations change for that body of water. They have to do a little bit more when they're trying to transport their harvest elsewhere. As I said, the funding ended in 2002. That was because of low recruits for juveniles. So they were like, oh, it's probably not going to do too well. Well, as anyone knows with invasive species, if there's still some there and you let them go, they're just going to, they're not going to disappear on their own. And then in 2015, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife was mandated to create the Washington Sea Grant crab team. And so they started doing monitoring throughout Puget Sound. And then in 2018, I was employed I got funding from Pacific States Marine Fisheries. And so I do a lot of early detection, rapid response in the Salish Sea. Washington Sea Grant, they were developed in 2015, and they're up to about 50 plus monitoring sites now and over 200 volunteers. So they are strictly citizen science, but I mean, some of you met Emily Grayson. She's part of Washington Sea Grant. So they go out and they do a lot of training for other people that go out in the field as well. This is just some backgrounds of what's happened within Puget Sound. So San Juan, Padilla Bay, 2016 is when that was detected. Through early detection, I think that Padilla Bay was more of a opportunistic find from the Padilla Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve. And so then they did a rapid response to those areas. And it's like, I'll get to rapid responses in a second. But yeah, there were scattered, there was only a few, so they don't think that there's a huge population out there, and they just might be a one-off type of deal going on. But there's still ongoing monitoring because we can. And then Dungeness Spit in 2017 through early detection also had their first find. And then we did a rapid response as well with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Washington Sea Grant, Department of Fish and Wildlife, and they caught 96 that year. And so they continued doing trapping efforts the next year to see if they could eradicate or remove as many as they could. And last year they only reported 69. So they did go down in a number. We'll see what this year holds for them. Makah, they had their first detection also in 2017 from just I think it was just some person detected it and reported it. And so they're like, well, let's do a rapid response. So they had that detection in August. They went out in October and they caught 34. So like the Padilla Bay, they had like 3 or 4 different green crab. So that wasn't like, let's start doing trapping next year every day. So when they did this at Makah, though, they had 34 in several different traps. They're like, well, let's start doing a planning to do this next year and do intense trapping efforts. So Makah Tribe took over that, and last year they got over 1,000 green crab. And as I said, they're still doing trapping, and every time they go out, they seem to come up with some sort of number. And Adrienne, like I said, she was doing some winter trapping. So this is kind of what a rapid response entails for us. That top photo here are some rapid response kits that we've created. They're basically minnow and fukui traps that we use out in the field, coolers, data sheets, anything that you kind of would need. And I've stuffed it all into a bag and it's ready to go. So if there was something happening, all you have to do is grab bait and take our stuff and go. But it does take a lot to do a rapid response because everyone knows it's access, it's getting partners. It's a lot of planning and logistics because you have tides to think about, and there's safety and training and identification and all of that to go about. So this is at Dungeness Spit and kind of what they went through. And that's why planning is so important, because this spit right here, it depends on tide if they're going to be able to get out to where the green crab were found or not, which is up here in this spot. And then there's intensive trapping efforts. So early detection with Washington Sea Grant, they usually do 6 traps, 3 of each, and they do about 20 feet apart. When you're doing an intense trapping effort, you're kind of putting a trap, well, what I do is kind of put a trap wherever you think seems to be a really good habitat spot. So you're putting as many as you can in a spot to see where they are. So this is what I did last year for myself. I sampled over about 42 sites. 2 of those were repeat sites. I put out over 1,000 traps, and we only caught 4 green crab, 2 of which were in the same trap. And That was with Washington Sea Grant as well. We did 4 different rapid response efforts and 3 follow-ups of places that have been trapped heavily before. These maps here kind of show what I do when I go out to do a follow-up assessment. And that's just as many traps as I can everywhere. As you can see, this one here, that's where a green crab was caught when we went out. And these are all the traps we put out. And we did 5 or 6 different sites. I think we did over like 100+ traps for 2 days. So the meat of what I want you guys to know, especially people that work in the fields or that will be around any salt tidal marshes, Spartina, that type of thing, is how to identify these guys. So they're pretty different from our native species. They're not always green, especially their undersides. They range in color depending on their molting cycle. So they can range from yellow to beige to like red, green, sometimes black. As you can see, this is in the middle, there's a male and a female. Males are always more narrow, and then the females are the wider abdomen. But the number one thing that you need to know is that they have 5 spines on either side of their eye. So, and most of our species that we see, Dungeness, and I think there's like 10, but these guys are 5. And our little tiny hairy shore crabs that you see, or purple shore crabs, they only have 3. So 5. 5 is like your number one thing you want to look for. I constantly have people ask me if you can eat these guys. They only get about 4 inches. You could try if you wanted to. Not really in Washington, but in Maine, I think they're trying to come up with some ways. Here's some more photos of them. All these molts on the top, those are molts. If you're out in the rack lines of beaches, you'll see a lot of molts washed up depending on where you are, depending on if there's a population that exists or not. You can keep those, that's fine. But these ones were found at Damon Point. The bottom, these 2 right here, that's the same crab. That guy was found at Scow Bay, and these 2 were the ones that were found at Westcott. And now here's some photos of our native shore crabs. These are the hairy shore crabs and the purple shore crabs, all those little ones that you see all the time out there. As I said, they have 3 spines, so they're a little bit different. And then this is quite a few of our native species, so I don't know if you guys are able to tell these apart, but I'll go through them. This is the graceful red rock. We have the hairy helmet, Dungeness, that's the hairy shore crab, spider crab, and you wouldn't believe how many times people have a misidentification. So I'm really big on people taking a photo and sending it in and asking before they kill it or anything like that. Because I had a guy one time be like, I got him. I had 2 green crabs. I killed them. They're in the freezer. And I was like, ooh, can I see a photo? He had 2 different species. He had a hairy helmet and a spider crab. So it's really important to take photos before you do anything. So yeah, report a sighting. This has been plugged millions of times already today, but Department of Fish and Wildlife also has their own type of thing, but we're all trying to push towards the WISC app. But if you need to go online to do it, if you don't have a smartphone, this is our new website at Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. I don't know if anyone has been on there since this happened, like last weekend. There's a lot of quirks happening, so bear with us while this goes through that process. This is some stuff that I put on here for myself. I've been here since June. Hopefully I'll continue to stay on for another however long I can. But I have a work phone number and an email you guys can get a hold of me. Anytime it's about green crab, I always check my email. I'm kind of weird on my phone. I'm like, I got it. So send me a message, send me a text with a photo if you see one out in the field, and I'll respond to that. And yep, so our website will take you to the WISC website, and that's the smartphone apps. And there is a national sighting database as well, but this is our state one that we go by. Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay. Yeah, so I think that's why a lot of trapping happens during like the warmer months. During the winter months when it's colder, they tend to migrate to deeper water. And that is something that I personally want to look at a little bit more, is doing winter trapping, but that's going to be at deeper water. The tides are different. It's a little bit more dangerous. So getting out there and really seeing is going to be a big part of that.